before we start, I'll keep it very brief, but thank you everyone for attending, and certainly welcome to today's Festival of Bright Ideas webinar. This initiative was launched back in 2017 in partnership with Pearson. Pearson have been our #1 supporter from this event from its inception, and the concept was about providing an opportunity for localised PD from around the country to then have the opportunity to from each state to be presented at the national conference. Because we migrated into a virtual conference this year, we've had the opportunity to run this as a virtual event, and in which case we've been able to run it over this next 3 days and really profile the 6 wonderful presentations that you're going to see. So I guess in many ways, the sessions we've chosen will present their practical ideas and practical teaching ideas in the 30-minute sessions over the next 3 afternoons. So I'd now like to introduce the first speaker, Arizio Sweating. Sorry, here are the 6 speakers before we get there. And so these guys are going to provide you with their particular topics over the next 3 afternoons. But without further ado, I would like to hand over to Arizio. He's an ELICOS teacher at the Institute of Continuing and TESOL Education, ICTE, the University of Queensland. And today, Arizio is going to be presenting on using independent learning cycles for reading and listening skills development. If I could please ask that you turn webcams off, if you could just mute, if nothing else, that will be very good so that we have enough attention to Arizio. So with that I'll hand over to Arizio. Thank you.
Thank you. So if I can start my PowerPoint. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me here. I would like to start this presentation with a definition of learner autonomy. The concept of learner autonomy has been around for a long time, so it's not a new concept. And the reason I would like to start with this is because it defines a lot of the things that I'm doing with this idea. So it is my belief that learners need to become successful in life, especially in the academic life. They need to have autonomy. They need to take charge of their own learning, and they need a high degree of awareness of what they are capable of doing and what they need to do. Also because when you are engaged in academic work, you need to be social. You do need to take part of a discussion, of a conversation, or a kind of sharing of ideas. There is sometimes this wrong notion that to be an academic learner, you need to always come up with something new. In fact, being an academic means to be able to understand other ideas and be able to look at where gaps are and continue conversations. So my motivation for this idea that I designed was based on the needs that my learners require for academic life. So some of the things that are on the screen and some of the things that students, once they are successful in their pathway course, that they need to be able to complete or to do in the academic life. So things like reading abstracts and writing summaries and paraphrases and taking notes, understanding other people's ideas, identifying arguments and searching databases. Okay, and searching for words and being able to participate in tutorials and seminars. So I'm just basically briefly just saying to you some of the things that I considered when I was planning this idea. So this idea came out not necessarily from a framework, but when I analyzed this activity after I've designed it, it's definitely works with enabling students to negotiate text. So they need to be able to negotiate text for information. They need to be able to negotiate text for linguistic purposes, and they need to negotiate text to be able to relate that to their life and be able to talk about it or to write about it. So I'm going to now describe what the activity actually is. So I wanted to design something that would supplement their materials. My students have good course books to work with. They have plenty of material. They have lots of things that they can work with. But I wanted to create something that they could generate further studies at home, and to generate, you know, a site where they could look for information themselves. So I designed a one-page template, which is divided into 3 parts. And these 3 parts will relate to those 3 aspects of negotiating a text, both oral text or written text. Now, in this presentation, I'm going to mainly focus on the reading questions because of time, but I will then make some final comments about how the reading questions template relates to this. So the most important thing to say first is, with this template, which the students receive in the first day of the course, you need to set this up in class. So the first time you're going to teach a reading activity, you need to use, or listening activity, you need to use these reading questions with them. And then once this will set up the practice, this will help them to understand what they have to do, and gives you an idea also how they are reading and how they relate to a text. I find that my students are usually very dependent on the kind of practice that they get from the course book, or the kind of practice that they bring from their previous learning. So the idea here is to enable them to know that they have to be able to do reading and listening by themselves, and use that for their academic life in the future. So the first part of this, the first part is basically you looking at the first 4 questions of the template. So here it's the question is about what the text is about. And I know that we normally do this kind of thing when we ask students to read for gist in class. But my idea here was for them to be able to read and write one sentence, which shows me how much they understand the topic of the text. Because now I've been working online, so I get the students to basically write their sentence, and when I put them in a breakout room, they share their sentences with the group, and then they come up with one sentence as a group, so I can see how the group understands that topic. The other important part of this is the second question, which is basically trying to encourage them to think about what the message from the writer is, because in academic life they need to be able to understand the discussion, what are other people saying about that topic, and how do they interpret what the people are saying. One of the things that goes with that is then question number 3, because my students are usually so used to thinking about giving you the right answers from the reading or the listening. I want them to be able to think about how what they're reading relates to their life, or relates to something outside of that context of the reading in class. So it could be maybe something that they saw in the news, something that is relevant to their country, something relevant to someone else's country, or something that triggers them to think, even if it's not necessarily related to the topic of the reading or the listening itself. And the other thing is, because students do have to interpret figures when they read academic texts, I ask them to look at pictures that accompany the text that they're reading. So sometimes a book will have a picture that has something relevant about the reading. Sometimes it has something very subtle that they can't always see, or they don't pay attention because they're too worried about the language. So I kind of encourage them to go and look at this information while they answer the 4 questions. So usually I go over this with them in class the first time, so we have a good discussion. This could take you at least 30 minutes basically in the first day with all these discussions, by sharing and looking at the sentences they come up with for question number 1, and then the different opinions. Then, of course, we then look at the second part of the template, which is related to using the text as a linguistic object. So here for me, the key is for the students to be able to focus on only a few words. Now, my students usually are students from contexts where they are overwhelmed with vocabulary to learn. So I'm trying to change their mind here by saying you have to only focus on about 2, 3 or 4 words that are totally new to you. And from those words that are usually important for them to be able to write or read successfully, and see how focusing on collocations and other aspects of that go with that word, they can generate a sort of a longer stretch of a longer range of vocabulary. Now, let me be more specific here. So the students in class, they will have a lot of vocabulary from the course book. So we do a lot of pre-teaching and post-teaching and all of that. So I don't usually focus on those. I focus on words that are not part of the material, but words that they find new, that are relevant for them to learn. So not words that are not relevant, they have to be relevant. And then they check those words using a dictionary and a collocations dictionary. And also I ask them to listen them using another website like English. So I'll give you some examples of what I mean by that. So my aim, for example, with asking them to look at a word like discussion, for example, is using a dictionary like the Cambridge Dictionary, which will allow them to look at the grammar, because a dictionary will have grammar, like the noun is accountable, uncountable, and also the pronunciation. So my objective here is also to start getting them less dependent on their translation dictionaries. Yeah. So the dictionary will give the meaning. But most importantly, and this is the key for me, is to get them to collect chunks, you know. So the dictionary will highlight those pieces of information for them. Like if you look on the screen, you have hold and have, and the prepositions that are important to know. And also in terms of use, there are lots of different examples that they can look at, and sometimes they can transform those examples to the kind of language that they need for their writing. So one thing I didn't mention before is that usually the kind of text that I select to use the template on the first day, and then for that to become a cycle, are texts that are relevant for their writing. So I look at the writing task that they have to do for the unit, and then I encourage them to find readings or listenings that will go with that kind of topic. So the other dictionary that I encourage them to use is the Oxford Dictionary, because here this dictionary will give them labels of grammatical labels that can really help them to learn the vocabulary and create that snowball of, from one word they can have so many other words that are related. So as you can see here, they have verb plus discussion, discussion plus verb. So the word order is something that they need to look at. And then after they've done that, I want them to be able to connect with the vocabulary by also noticing it in oral speech. So Youglish is a great website that you can use, because not only as you listen, you can read the script, the transcript at the bottom, but it highlights the word, and you can sort of notice some of those collocations as you read. So you need to encourage them to pay attention to the collocations as they listen to this. So I'll just play an example here for the word discussion so that you can see. Oh, I need to put the sound, I'm sorry. I'll share again. Okay.
Question here, which I'm hoping we can get into during discussion.
It's very hard to have a discussion in this country at the moment, though.
It certainly stimulated some discussion online.
So as you can see, there were things like during and stimulated discussion, have a discussion. So because of the presentation, I can't give you a longer video, but they will be paying attention. So they will be recycling the vocabulary that they have collected in their reading and in their study.
Your question here.
So after that, we are now ready to relate the text to themselves and to talk about it. So one of the things that they need to do is to take notes. So I encourage them to take notes, and then using the information, they can talk to each other. I put them in the breakout room, and then they sort of paraphrase what they've collected from the text in spoken form. They will also use this information to write a summary later of their text. So it's, in a way, it's encouraged them to understand the text by making notes of the information that they learn. These notes will also help them with the next stage of the template, which is for them to be able to search for similar topics. So one of the things that I encourage them to do is to use the Boolean operators. So one of the things on Google that they need to learn how to do is to use something like the inverted commas when they want to search a particular phrase. So if they use inverted commas, they will just generate that particular phrase. And then using and or, they will also be able to achieve different results with their search. One important thing to mention here is the word news. I encourage them to use the word news because otherwise they're going to get very long text or text that are not very useful for them because you will put them off reading. So they need to find things that are short because they're going to have to do many different types, many reading exercises during that week. So here's an example of something that this search generated. This was in fact from one of my students. Nature, conservation, tourism can coexist despite conflict. So, and it's not a very long text, and the student use that in their cycle. So, of course, there has to be some form of accountability later. But then once they've found text to read, I encourage them to put it on the class Padlet. So here you can see that there are some suggested readings on the class Padlet. Now, if I've got 18 students, they all generated one reading, then I'll have 18 readings on the Padlet. So then the students don't actually need to go searching anymore because they can share the ones that they've got in the Padlet for that day. If they do this every day, then you have lots of different readings that they can use. But also, for me, I encourage them just to have, as far as responding to me, I require that they complete 5 a week. But then this is only so that I can keep track of how much they're doing some self-study. But if there is no number, they can, if a student is a good reader and wants to continue, they can apply the template and read as many texts as they like. So this process, this activity, this idea was organic because it developed. So I needed some form of accountability, and I needed some form to check if my students were completing their task, because at university, they will also have to complete tasks. So I designed a weekly reading record sheet. And this reading record sheet contains an example, as you can see on the screen, contains a summary that we wrote as a class for the example. And of course, I put there some key words for the grammar that they need to be able to collect when they're looking at the grammar or vocabulary. And then, of course, they collect some sentences from the dictionary that they think will be useful to highlight those collocations. So my students are only expected to complete 5 for that particular reading and 5 for the week. But as I said, they are encouraged to read as much as they can. So if they have lots of sheets of record sheets for themselves, that's fine. But I only require them to show me 1 per week. So here's an example of a student text that she found. So she found that text, nature, conservation, tourism, and then also some of the collocations that she collected and her summary there, just to illustrate how seriously they have been embracing this idea. Now, coming to the listening part, so that I can be able to answer some questions. The listening question is very similar. The only major difference is that because of the nature of listening itself, the students have to listen in parts. So then they listen to different parts of the text and they complete the question, the first question about what it is about by focusing on different parts of the text. And then there is a question that encourages them to think holistically. So that's one of the main differences. And of course, there is the fact that if they're viewing, they also need to look at the imagery and see what the images are showing them. In terms of language, it's pretty much the same, but because they don't have always a tape script available, because they may be finding a video, sometimes if they're using YouTube, then the video that they are using will have a button that you press on YouTube and you give you the subtitles. So if they're encouraged to use the subtitles here for focusing on language. So I'll just give you an example of one video that has subtitles that they can use. So they can pause and look at the vocabulary after they've listened and complete some of the task. Now, sometimes the subtitles are not very good, but at least encourage them to listen so they can bring to you things that they don't understand or the subtitles is wrong. So sometimes you've got to check with them. Otherwise, they might be listening to something and reading the wrong information because it's not always perfect online. So I'll just play this one just to show an example.
Biodiversity is a term that represents the total variety of all life on Earth. That's a big thing to sum up. Thousands of different wild habitats, millions of different species, billions of different individuals, and the trillions of different characteristics they all have. The total biodiversity of our planet is immense, which is a good thing, because the more biodiversity, the more secure all life on Earth is, including ourselves.
So in a sense, that's basically it. I find that there are, of course, implications to this. There are things that I want to continue to develop with this activity. Some of the things that I've started doing recently is because of the results that I have achieved from them completing their reading records and their readings, is that sometimes they are able to collect vocabulary, they're able to collect, to learn some new information about a particular topic, but the structure of sentences still need a little bit of work. So I have started doing a lot of paraphrasing. So they've been doing paraphrasing of the content of the text, so they can start collecting chunkier pieces of language so they can use in their writing. And I did achieve success in one of my writing tasks where the students did that, and they were able to transfer the content of their readings to their writing. So I'm happy to answer some questions, and the information about how to contact me, it's on the screen. Thank you very much. Sophie?
Arizio, thank you so much. And hello, everyone else. I'm Sophie O'Keefe, and I'm the Professional Development Manager at English Australia, and I'm taking over from Brett Blacker in emceeing the